Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar series on the 6 secrets to giving amazing conference talks. My name is Warwick John Fay, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to speak with you today. So let's jump straight into the topic of the day. So it's about finding common ground. Last week, we talked about starting with why and how that was so important. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar series. So great. So we're going to have a look at finding common ground today. And we're going to have a look at 4 ways that when you come onto the stage, you can find a way to connect with your audience. Because no matter how good your ideas are, how brilliant your presentation is, if you're not able to connect with your audience, if you're not able to have an emotional and a human connection, your ideas are going to be quickly forgotten. So what makes people truly listen? This is a real challenge, isn't it? Let's have a look at some ideas here on the slide. So when people see themselves reflected in you, then they really listen. So you have to be relatable. You have to be likable. You have to be accessible to people. People recognize shared values or shared stories, even if their background or their history or their journey or their life is very different to yours. When we share our stories, when we allow the audience to see themselves in us, then we can really make that connection. Even somebody like Jack Ma, a billionaire, former CEO of the largest e-commerce company in the world, he was able to make a connection to his audience by talking about when he graduated, how he had quite simple jobs. He wasn't getting paid a lot of money. It took him 3 months to save up to buy a bicycle. Now, a story like that is very relatable. Most people in the audience could relate to that. We've all had experiences when we're younger, when we really wanted something, and it took us a long time to save up. So that's a great example of how you can come down to the same level as the audience if you're somebody like Jack Ma, who's obviously sort of like seen or elevated at a higher level. But for every speaker, every business speaker should be able to have that sense of connection and allowing the audience to see themselves in your story. So let's jump in now and have a look at what are these 4 techniques that we're going to have a look at today. Role model, relate, treasure, and create connection. So these are from 2 books I wrote, The 1 Minute Presenter and Influence the Jack Ma Way. So the role model is really where, you put yourself up as a role model, but not necessarily to elevate yourself. Sometimes you might need to do that if you feel like you need to impress people, but also as a role model to walk your talk. If you are telling people as a leader, this is the way that you should be doing things, then you need to role model. You need to be showing that as well. The relatability that we just talked about, having those emotional bridges between you and the audience. Treasure your audience. That was, step number 2 in my book, The 1 Minute Presenter. Treasure your audience. Really care for them, want to help them, have that empathy with your audience. When you come up onto a stage and you're speaking to an audience, you should have a deep desire to want to help make their lives better in some way. You've got to create a connection. You've got to have that human connection. So these are the 4 areas we're going to have a look at in our webinar today. People follow values, not titles. Absolutely. We talk about this as being a leader in name only. Your title is not enough. You need to lead by values. But really, what are values? Values are things that, like an iceberg, is under the ocean. People might not see or understand your values. What are they going to see? They're going to see your day-to-day behavior. So if you have a value of respect, and that's something that's very important to you, how do I know? I might not know you that well. Maybe we haven't talked about that before. But in your interactions, you're very respectful to not only senior people or important people, but you're very respectful to the person you're buying a coffee from the taxi driver, from just people that you don't know that well. I can see that respect in the way you talk, the tone of your voice, the sharpness of what you say, the choice of words that you use. I can see that respect. I can feel that respect. So now I know that you're someone who leads with respect. So your values, everybody has values, but how do they show up day to day? A great example of this is Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, who was a great role model for having a very human centered approach, a very empathetic and care driven approach to his employees. He's someone who walked that talk. It became part of the cultural DNA. It wasn't just words. It was like, opportunities and programs that were running inside the company. And also every time he came to speak, he showed and demonstrated that care and that empathy. You look after your employees, and your employees will look after your customers. So, a little exercise that you can do to this is think about your top three core values. What is most important to you? Write them down. Not 10, write down your top three. And then ask yourself, do your daily actions and decisions align and reflect these values? Sometimes, because we're under a lot of pressure, we've got to get things done, we might be in difficult roles where our values are not seen in our day-to-day decisions or our day-to-day behavior. So one of the things that you can do as a leader is to be able to role model and show these values. Then you're really walking your talk, which is incredibly important if you want people to follow you. So number one, be a role model through values. When you're on a stage, how it relates to conference speaking is you want to show what your values are. What do you stand for? Are you someone who is all about being authentic? Well, does that come across in your talk? Or are you using a lot of slides and a lot of like jargon? Or do people really understand your story? Can they really feel that they're on the journey with you? So really think of, use your values as a way to connect, find that common ground with the audience. Our second technique of the day in helping you to find a common ground is back to our old friend stories. Facts inform, stories connect. You've got to use facts. It's very unlikely that you'll be, delivering a speech where you don't need to use some sort of data. That's great. Use your data, but you can also wrap your data in stories. You can have that emotional connection to your audience. Lots of great examples. Steve Jobs is used a lot, because he was very good at sharing personal stories. His Stanford commencement address was a good example of that, where it was all about him and all about his stories. So that would be, if you haven't watched that Stanford address by Steve Jobs recently, go back and have a listen to it. It's very powerful. Stories can show who you really are. So when you looked at that commencement address from Jobs, you got a sense of who he was. You got a deeper understanding of what's important to him. Stories can show vulnerability. Your stories don't always have to be hero stories where you overcame challenges and you delivered amazing results. If you're talking to your team, or even if you're talking in a conference where you want to show vulnerability, a story is a great way to do that. I would, though, as a business speaker, be strategic about how you show vulnerability. You want to make sure that it's within a context or an arc that makes sense for the speech that you're delivering, the talk that you're delivering. So it's okay to share struggles and failures, but there should then be a learning or a development from that point that allows the audience to follow with you. Not because you only want to make yourself look like someone who, moved on from failure. That is important for your credibility. But also you want to give hope and inspiration and guidance to the audience. They might see your vulnerability and the struggle and the failure you went through. And they're like, my goodness, I went through the same thing. I went through something really similar. It was terrible. I didn't know what to do. But now in your talk, you allow them to say, look, here's how I moved on. Here's what I learned. And that's giving that next step, that next piece of the puzzle that could be very helpful to your audience. So always move on from vulnerability. People want hope. They want inspiration. They want guidance. That's why they come and listen to your speech. Make your audience the hero. Of course, you're on the stage. Naturally, you're the hero. Naturally, you're elevated. You're someone who is in that position of authority. So if you're able to come down to the audience's level, put them at the center of the story, frame stories so they can see themselves overcoming those challenges, then people will really connect. They'll be listening, they'll be engaged, they'll be absorbed in the story you're telling. That's why stories are so powerful. Stories are powerful because we can see ourselves, we can feel ourselves in the story. We're listening to the words, but we're also experiencing it for ourselves. That's the connection. That's the engagement. It's not only the words of the story. So, a practical takeaway for point number two about relate: take out one statistic. Think about how you can add a brief personal story, a quick anecdote, a sharing from a client, whatever it is, a piece of insight that a mentor explained to you, something that allows the audience to experience it rather than just intellectually understand it. Have a balance. We need to have a balance. So, connecting with stories, make a point, tell a story. Make a point, tell a story. And if you do have to deliver data heavy presentations, then always look for the story, look for the connection, behind that data. In Steve Jobs' Stanford address, he talks about connecting the dots. That's something you can do in data heavy presentations. You can show the data, you can explain the data set, and then make some connections, bring it to a higher level. Very, very powerful if you're able to do that. So point number two, relate, connect with stories. The next one really goes about treasuring the audience. This is where we have a deep understanding of the life, of the experiences, of the pain points, of the challenges of our audience. We step into their shoes. We demonstrate real empathy. If you're able to do that as a speaker, when you step in front of a large group of people, you're really going to have that connection. You're going to have people's attention. They're going to think that you're very well informed and researched and you cared about them. And you see it from their point of view. So one thing you can do is when you're putting yourself, you're seeing the world in their position, you can then focus in on something that is important to them. Maybe it's a pain point, maybe it's a frustration, maybe it's a difficulty they're facing or a concern, and then you can address that. So very important that you can see things from their point of view. It's not always easy. You might not know the audience that well. In the past, I've given speeches in high schools, and at that time, I didn't really have much experience speaking to 15 and 16-year-olds. But you've got to find a way to think about what are they experiencing, what's going on in their world. Talk to parents who have children of that age. You get early, arrive early to the talk and speak to people, talk to them. I always like getting there early and saying, what's going on, what's top of mind, what's concerning you, what's happening, what challenges are you facing. Really have that deep dive. Stepping into their shoes, Barack Obama's 2008, the Yes We Can speech was really about, it is about the us and the we, not only the I. And that really leads us to the practical point that you can see in yellow on the slide there. Count the yous versus the I's in your next speech. Effective influencers focus on the audience, focus on you and us and we rather than I. I is when you're explaining, this is what I've gone through, this is my experience, this is my journey. Nothing wrong with that, but you always want to make sure that you have a combination of those in the talk that you're delivering. If you're not that familiar with your audience, then research their challenges. So go and talk and research and use GBT and use the tools at your fingertips to be able to understand what's keeping the audience awake at night. Use their language. If there's certain terminology or language or words that the audience might use, then by all means use those. Have that mirroring of language can be a very powerful way to make a connection. And then addressing their unspoken questions. What's on their mind? What are they not talking about? What issues do they not want to bring up that would be helpful for you to raise? If you can raise those questions and present answers and solutions, people are really going to appreciate that. They're really going to feel that you care and you're understood what's going on for them. And the final point for today is connection beats perfection. So create your connection. You've got to find ways to connect to your audience. So sure, it's it's about using eye contact and those sorts of devices, rhetorical devices. They are of course important. You want to show that you are looking and at your audience rather than looking at your slides. But really, it's the overall vibe. It's the overall feeling. Warren Buffett, again, one of the best investors probably the world's ever seen. But really, when he communicates, very folksy, very down to earth, explains things in very easy to understand terms, that's a superpower. He can explain complex financial ideas in very, very simple terms. His partner, Charlie Munger, I think, referred to some complicated derivatives as weapons of mass destruction. And that's sort of again a very visual idea. If you don't know much about the opaque world of derivatives and options, but you can understand what the impact of them might be. So some tips that you can use to make that connection. Absolutely, you want to have good eye contact. Pausing during a talk can really make a big difference. One technique that we use quite a lot on the stage is if you have an important point and then tell your audience what that important point is. So you pause, say something important, and then pause again. And by having that pause around your key message, you tell the audience, this was important. This is something I just said that was really important. Number three, have a tagline. A tagline is a soundbite or a summary of your overall talk. It could be a question, a challenging question. It could be different things like that, or a statement, or a statistic, things like that to really sort of get straight into the talk, really grab your audience and make that connection. What's the cost of a missed opportunity? Or what's the cost of an idea that doesn't land? Could be a way of just sort of asking that question. That when you ask a question, the audience starts thinking about it. And of course, being connected for conference speeches, but also for small group discussions, really be there, be in the room, be alert, be connected, be looking at people, be trying to read the room as you're delivering your talk. You don't want to be in yourself, just thinking about yourself the whole time or thinking about your content the whole time. You want to try to be reading the room. So a great presenter will, of course, have great personal skills. The presenter has good skills. They'll have great content. But that third circle is the connection with the audience. They really understand, they can read the room, they can feel the vibe and the emotion that's going on. So, you want to get to that stage. Practical takeaways here, open with eye contact, brief pause, clear tagline, something like that, just to really grab people's attention. You can experiment with this, try out different approaches. So today we've shared a really solid technique to use to give an amazing conference speech. It's about finding common ground. You might be faced at a large audience, 100, 1,000 people. It's not always easy to find that common ground. So get down to those basic things that we all relate to: values, stories, human empathy, care, wanting to help people, those kind of universal values, if you like. So we want to model those. We want to walk our talk as much as possible. Share stories, collect your stories, have a story bank, really build up those little anecdotes that you use and vary them. If you deliver the same presentation time and time again, experiment with adjusting or adapting the story, see how they connect. Try and find the humorous parts of a story. If you find that an audience laughs at one part of your story, listen to your recording and say, hey, why did they laugh there? I didn't expect them to laugh at that moment. Why was that? Go back and listen to the couple of minutes before. Why did they find that moment particularly humorous? And then once you've done that, you say, okay, well, maybe I can actually make that adaptation. I'll do that next time. Treasure your audience. You've got to care for your audience. You've got to really want to help your audience as much as you can. If you really demonstrate that, the audience will feel it. And then the connection. We talked about the different ways of connecting with eye contact, with taglines. All of those are going to help with the interaction. Using quizzes, using polls, using technology as well can be a good way to do that. So today we really had a look at finding that common ground. The challenge this week is share one story or value with your team that reveals what you truly stand for. Walk your talk. Are you walking your talk? Get some feedback. Am I really living these values? I say these are important, but am I truly living them? If you are, then you're going to be very relatable as a person. When you talk about your values, people are going to see that in your behavior and they're going to connect to it. So incredibly important part of your credibility. Are you ready to transform your leadership journey? Hopefully these webinars are helping you build up some of those core principles, those core skills that are, going to help you do that. But it's not just about conference speaking. These are things you can do inside your organization. You can do, on your team level. You can just really think about, strengthening these relationships. If you have one person in your organization, like a stakeholder, get to know them. Get to understand a little bit more about their values, understand what makes them tick. And that can be a way of building that rapport and strengthening that relationship. Because ultimately, when you're in an organization, it's a team sport. You need people to help you. Um, those people, particularly at the mid level of organizations, if you have a mentor or you have a sponsor, you're three times more likely to get promoted because you've got that informal relationship of people helping you out. We all need help from people around us. I'm always available if you would like some support at writing your conference speech, practicing it, rehearsing it, making it, a real zinger. I'm here to help you. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we'll talk again. So thank you very much. This was the second in a series of six topics. We're going to cover another one next week. So I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.